Hello, everyone. My name's Kate Cooper. I'm Head of Research, Policy and Standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today, the first in our series of 5 webinars looking at supporting mental health in collaboration with Mental Health at Work, a community interest company that provides advice, training and consultancy in mental health at work. Please do download the handout. It's embedded in the webinar because there are instructions there about getting the best audio and of course how to submit questions for our 2 presenters. So I'm really delighted to introduce Alison Pay, Managing Director of Mental Health at Work. Thank you both, and thank you of course to you, Maggie, for joining us today. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Kate. As Kate mentioned, we're a community interest company. We've got a mission which is about improving working lives by changing attitudes and behaviours around mental health. We work to develop customised programmes for all organisations which really focus on what the workplace needs to know to bring about these changes. In this series, we'll be giving you a little bit of an insight into key aspects of our programme, and we hope that you'll find this very useful. But it is, if you would like to find out a little bit more and a bit more about our comprehensive programmes, of course, please get in touch. I'd now like to hand over to Maggie Rose, who's our Head of Content Evolution, a role which has never been more needed than it has over the last 8 weeks. Maggie.
Thank you, Alison, and good afternoon to you all. And thank you so much for having the interest to join the series of seminars about mental health. We have a very, very short time for me to try and get as much information as I can over to you. So they're broken up into a series of 5, 3 of which we will be delivering. And my first question, of course, is about what is mental health. Now, generally speaking, we would have discussions about this, and of course, today's session is a really potted version. So let me tell you what some of the issues are when I ask that question. The major issue is that mental health is still not really recognized as something that we all have. The word mental itself carries so much stigma that as soon as people hear the word mental, they kind of block out the word health, so they hear mental illness. So in terms of some of our major messages, we are dealing a lot with language and stigma. And so we want to get the word mental health into our vocabulary. We all have it. It isn't stable. It exists on a continuum for us all. And how we experience it is a very personal and subjective matter. So this is how we actually describe the continuum. And this continuum is extremely helpful for the workplace. So you'll see there on one side of the continuum, we all have our mental health to a greater or lesser degree. Now, if we apply this now to the workplace, what we're hoping is with good mental health, we have high productivity, we have thriving workforces, and we have people that enjoy and are happy at work. However, that's not where we all stay. So this continuum demonstrates that when we leave our mental health for all number of reasons, then we will move towards having an issue. And that issue is often seen in the workplace, in the way of poor productivity or presenteeism, or a change in performance in somebody's workplace. Now, what do I mean by a mental health issue? Well, I mean that you've left your optimum mental health status and you are either telling me or showing me that all isn't well with you. It isn't illness, but it is issue. It marks a change, and one of our major messages for the workplace is let's get better at noticing the change the movement from mental health to a mental health issue. And in many, many cases, if we bring forward reasonable adjustments, if we employ signposting and really authentic support, then in many cases, we can prevent people moving closer towards illness. So what do I mean by illness? Mental illness means that I can no longer do what I could, should, and want to do because I'm ill. And in the workplace, this may be seen by sickness, by lack of productivity, and by absenteeism. And very often you won't know the reason for that. And that's what our whole initiative is trying to do, to seek parity between my admission, between my physical health and my mental health. Let's be honest. The other thing that mental health at work are really involved in is the words of stigma. We haven't got long to stay on these words, but actually, when you start to have a look at them within our media, you will see that we are continually fighting against words that actually induce the wrong messages. They induce myths and fantasy. They induce fear. They induce suspicion. And they actually stop people from wanting to have conversations about mental health. So I leave you with a thought there, and maybe you'd like to post a question here, but how many words do you hear that stigmatize your own opinion of mental health? If I say the word psychosis to you, what is it that you're actually thinking? If I say the word neurotic to you, then what are you thinking there? So these are reflective questions that you can ask yourself and ask your teams, because we need to overcome the myths and fantasy about what mental illness actually is. So let's have a look. What is mental illness? You will see on the screen now the common labels or diagnosis of mental illness. Those of you that wonder why we still use labels and diagnosis of mental illness is because at the moment we are governed by a Mental Health Act. We are governed by a diagnostic manual. We are very much governed in a lot of these cases by a biopathological paradigm of approaching mental illness. Now, we're not here today to argue the wrongs and rights of that, and we could argue that for a very long time. But suffice to say that doctors, both psychiatrists and GPs, are still using these diagnoses. You in the workplace will still see people sending in their sick notes or reasons for absence to be one of these diagnoses. You may be absolutely using it yourself. This may apply to you, your loved ones, and those you care about. And then if we go into the community, an awful lot of prescribing behaviors are based on diagnosis. So like them or loathe them, diagnosis and labels are still very much in our world of mental health. Today, we haven't got too much time to go into the specifics of these signs and symptoms of these illnesses. That may be something you'd like to ask a question about, or it may be something that you'd like to make a note of learning more about. But the key message that I want to raise is that we use some of these mental illnesses of adjectives to describe a current state. The ones that you see on the screen are illness nouns. So these are actual illnesses. So anxiety is used very frequently and very often to describe how you feel right now. You usually mean that your anxiety has been triggered by some kind of event or something that you fear or dread, and you will have an experience of anxiety. This is rarely long lasting, and when the trigger is taken away, you'll often find yourself returning very swiftly to mental health. Depression is the same. We overuse this word. So anxiety, depression, really overused words, very mixed up together, certainly mixed up in terms of diagnosis, and it's very evident that they are still mixed up in terms of prescription. So what I would just like to do is run through a couple of myths in the absence of time. And I would like to tell you the myths about anxiety. The myth about anxiety is that it's about weakness, that it's about, wimpy behavior. Anxiety is a paralyzing and debilitating disability that is categorized as an illness, but is infinitely malleable to various treatments, both psychotherapeutically and medical treatments. And really, it has every potential to be managed by the individual with a variety of approaches. How I summarize always anxiety, if it were a speed, you would see fast. You would feel fast and you would see fast. Depression is slow, if it were a metaphor, and these are very generalized statements, but in the main, we're talking about slow. People, again, will use the word depression and say that they are depressed when sometimes they're feeling very low and they don't have emotional language to use the correct term. So very often depression needs to be listened to very carefully to find out exactly what somebody is experiencing. The myth about obsessive compulsive disorder is this is not a tidy person. It is not somebody who likes rituals and lines up their cupboards nice and tidily and sorts out their desk before they go home. Obsessive compulsive disorder, again, is a huge life-changing disability when it's in its illness form. And really, I can't help but ask for you to consider when you're using this term. It's a term that is very laughed at, it's ridiculed, but it's a really serious effect on somebody's life, their relationships, and the things that they want to and could do. Eating disorders, again, the myth around this is that people have control over it, that if only they just saw themselves in the mirror and could actually correct their eating, that they would have the control to do otherwise. This is a very complex and much argued illness that still sits under the Mental Health Act. The myth about schizophrenia is Jekyll and Hyde, split personality, multiple personalities, violence, danger. This is absolutely not true. You have more chance of being struck by lightning than to be struck by somebody who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. I've worked in psychiatry for 37 years, and I really urge you to reframe your understanding of this complex, lonely, and very misunderstood illness. Bipolar disorder, the fantasy, the myth about bipolar disorder is it's become a very, in terms of a mental illness, it's very often talked about a lot now, but it's still understood in terms of its cyclical nature and the inability to actually control mood swings without fully understanding this illness and or taking medication to start to stabilize mood. Dementia, the fantasy, the myth about dementia is that it's Alzheimer's. At the moment, there are over 100 categorized dementias, and we are no longer seeing that this is an illness for the older generation. Some of the young onset dementias are better known about now, and there has been an incredible increase in younger onset dementias, certainly in the UK over the last 5 years. Personality disorder, again, this is very misunderstood and is often known or aligned with multiple personality disorder. And this is not a correct alignment, although there may be an aspect of multiple personality within the diagnosis of personality disorder. Because we have no more time, I urge you that if you're really interested in any of these illnesses, the first step is to understand the truth about them rather than listen to what your parents or your grandparents or the media or the music is saying to you. I'd like to ask now if you have any questions for me. And if you have any questions, can you start to post them now?
Thank you very much, Maggie, for that very brief but really helpful and insightful oversight. And I think that's probably cleared up a lot of things for a lot of people. So the first question, and this is for you, Alison, and I think it's something that will resonate with quite a few of us actually. What do you do if one of your team clearly has a mental health issue, but they just won't acknowledge it?
Well, as the first step would always be to try and ask some questions so that somebody feels confident being able to talk to you about what is going on for them. And then when you've asked the question, to actually really make the time to listen, not to try and solve it, because my mental health is my mental health. It's no one else's responsibility. It will be very different from everyone else's experience of mental health. So there's absolutely nothing that you can do to fix somebody else. It may be then a good idea to suggest some appropriate signposting and support that you may have in your organisation, such as an employer assistance programme or other signposting, or signposting that's outside of your organisation. We'll talk in tomorrow's session in a little bit more detail about how you might approach this. Is there anything else that you'd like to add at this stage, Maggie?
The only thing is there are some people that like to just say I'm fine, because most of the time we're very used to people asking the question, how are you, and not really being interested in the answer. So I think your first bit of reflection yourself is how interested are you and how much time have you got to listen if I do answer. If somebody does say I'm fine, I usually accept that first time around. We're all entitled to share, you know, our thoughts and feelings with whoever we wish to. But what I would say is increase your vigilance. So just listen out a little more, pay a bit more attention, so that when you ask again, you might have a tangible example to be able to offer why you're concerned about someone.
Oh, thanks very much, Maggie. I hope that's been helpful. Another question here is there a difference between emotions and mental health?
Oh, now we enter into philosophical debate about it. The quick answer of that is no. But remembering what I said about language. So the difference is we may mention anxiety or depression as an emotion, but when it's a mental illness, it's very often demonstrated in thoughts, feelings, and actions. So the two are totally married together, but beware of emotional language because it may not necessarily mean mental health language.
Thanks very much. And we have a question here. This could keep us going for the next couple of hours. But Alison, how open is the UK government to addressing concerns and issues about mental health?
I think I probably might need some support from Maggie on this one. I think over the last 4 years, we have seen quite significant strides across society to really start to open up our conversations about mental health, broaden the discussion to be a lot more than it being just about treatment or research about mental illness, but really about thinking about mental health as we would look at it across the continuum. So there have been a number of task forces put together. The Stevenson Farmer Report is one of the most prominent, and I'd really urge everybody on the call to have a look at that and read that. Some very sensible guidance there about what workplaces can do about mental health, and in fact what the returns to that workforce can be, both at a personal level and at a financial level, in terms of really making a difference. So I think the government, certainly for the workplace, has reached out and sought the experts in this area to help provide them with some guidance around that. In the main, I think the general direction is they're looking for the workforce to be able to lead that initiative. Maggie?
Yes, the direction is certainly looking brighter, and we are talking about this so much more. It is on the agendas, but unfortunately, like everything else, your money has to go where your mouth is, and we are still in mental health seeing figures like 6% of the NHS budget coming towards mental health, when we know that 27% is what we need for keeping us buoyant. So there's a long way to go, but there's a lot more talking. And to be honest, I think this situation with COVID-19 is certainly, for all the wrong reasons, accelerating the attention to mental health and mental illness.
Oh, thanks for that, Maggie, because that's answered another question about the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. But we've got quite a long question here, but hopefully you'll be able to help with it. If you're working with employees that are undergoing counselling but are undiagnosed, so they've been classified as broadly suffering from anxiety and depression, should we avoid using these terms in our conversations with them, or is it okay to ask them what they believe anxiety and depression to mean, and how might you go about it? Big question. Hope you can answer it.
Oh, I'm very clear about my own answer to that, so it's quite easy for me to do. You are always led by the person that's telling you. So if they use the word anxiety, so do I. If they use the word depression, so do I. If not, I talk about how things might be feeling at the moment, or, what is it that's concerning them. So try and stay with the language of the person that is experiencing it. And that way, you're not trying to inject any of your own interpretation, which would mean, that you may be wrongly diagnosing it anyway. And some people really, really do not want to hear mental illness labels. In terms statistically, we know a lot about men in this area. So we do know that men are very unlikely to be using the words anxiety and depression. And men are far more likely to be talking about imposed stress, when what they really mean is maybe they are suffering from a mental health issue.
Thanks very much then. Alison, here's a question that is probably of interest to everybody. What proactive measures should organisations be taking at the moment to help support mental health during COVID-19? Or is there something that organisations could and should be doing?
I think the most important thing that workplaces can do is to make sure that you know your people and that you have conversations with them as regularly as you can. Try and use video conferencing as well as just over the phone, because you need to be able to read those visual signals as well as the verbal signals. And we know it isn't as easy as it is if you're in a room with someone, but it is a very good alternative. So it's about knowing your people, opening up a conversation about what's happening for them and how you might be able to support them within the workplace. Anything else to add to that?
The only thing I would add, we're hot on the press of some very interesting statistics that have been issued just last week from the Mental Health Foundation. And I think appraising yourself, certainly as leaders and managers, appraising yourself of what to expect during this time is a really good preparation for leaders and managers, because we absolutely know, and their survey was a significant sample size, and we know what's happening to people is they are not sleeping, that people are feeling highly pressurized and anxious. And there's quite a staggering statistic on there. Correct me, Alison, if I'm wrong, but it's about, on average, people are doing about 25 hours more work than they would do at work. So, appraise yourself as leaders and managers of what to expect, and you can then start to look out for it.
Oh, thanks for that, Maggie. I think that's something that we should everybody be aware of, and to watch out for that. Absolutely. If some people have been forced into sort of not being able to work at all, and then others are obviously doing far more than is good for them. We've had a question here at an individual level, really. How could you recognize mental illness in yourself, really? And therefore keep yourself mentally healthy and strong is the word used here. What are the signs to look for?
Oh, that's a gorgeous question, because, of course, we are naturally, with our defense mechanisms and the way our psychology is set up, we're quite naturally programmed not to notice it in ourselves. And so if you are experiencing changes in yourself, I think one of the most important things is to listen what your nearest and dearest are saying. Listen to what people are telling you, because it's quite hard to A, recognize it when you're in it, and B, name it. So I think that recognizing it in yourself, and listen, I think there's no doubt, and we're going to go into more of this on session 2 and session 3, but the continuum that I showed you, where most of us 1 year ago might have started from the arena of optimum mental health a lot of the time, most of us now are halfway up that continuum for one reason or another, and that may be work, that may be home, it may be fear, it may be isolation, it could be bereavement. We know that we aren't starting from a mentally healthy place for most people right now. So my advice will be, look at your own behaviors, notice things about yourself, your sleeping, your eating, your tearfulness, what you're listening to, what you're reading, just what you're playing, the music that you're playing. And then if you can't recognize that in yourself, those people who you love and care about, when they give you feedback, believe them the first time.
Thank you very much for that. And we've got one last question. I think I'll leave this one with you, Maggie. Lots of celebrities are posting their emotions, etc., online, and some are receiving ridicule for it. Do you think this affects the general everyday person, the non-celebrities amongst us, and with them seeking help or opening up to others? I suppose the question there is this good or is it not good?
Oh, exactly. And I think that this is the stigma journey that we have to go on, because we're asking people to be open and honest, and then when they are, they're ridiculed. So, and obviously with some of the personalities that you're probably referring to, whoever asked the question, then some of them are ridiculous. So I think the validity of some of the using of mental health and mental illness language needs to just be carefully looked at. But for me, I think we just need to keep talking about it. You will always be ridiculed for whatever you do, but I think with you, choose the people you trust and care about. If you are leaders and managers, then please convey authentic, genuine caring. Because the minute you start to get any kind of ridicule or any kind of pushing away, then we start to limit honesty. So, does the media help us or hinder us? Well, both is the answer.
Well, I'm sorry, but that we've actually run out of time. Thank you both very much. I know I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Please, everybody else, join us and do send us your feedback, the survey that you receive at the end of this webinar. Thank you all for joining. Thank you especially, of course, Maggie and Alison. And as I say, looking forward to tomorrow.
Thank you and goodbye.